When I discovered this book would classify me as a con man, I bought this Kiss the Con Man t-shirt hoping for a silver lining. And indeed, I found one. The problem is, the reaction from the neighbors was not so good.
Nope, not happening.
But on the other hand, the women in the produce section gave me more space. I already reviewed part 1 of the book about health, part 2 about climate. Part 3 of the book has 3 separate chapters for different categories of con artists. Big religion, big business, and global elites. I'll address each of those, but first I should respond to a request author Jayne Buxton had for me. When I tweeted about episode 2, she replied she would never respond to such a cherry-picked misrepresentation of her book. Anyway, her response was I should clarify that her tweet I referenced in episode 2 was a reply to Dr. Coyce, not to me. I responded that I was sorry, I might be bad at Twitter, but I took it to be for both of us. I wanted to have a good conversation, so I promised to acknowledge that she intended it for Dr. Coyce. And she blocked me. Dr. Coyce is a wonderful guy, by the way, an emergency room physician, and I thought he had asked nicely for a reference. She took it as an insult and got pretty aggressive. He responded that he was sorry, and he truly didn't mean it as an insult. Her point about cherry picking, I did want to take that seriously. My episodes are 20 minutes and her audiobook is 19 and a half hours, so she could be right. I have to pick topics. I chose what I thought were her central themes that she mentions in interviews when she only has an hour. Let's see, B12, saturated fat, protein, vegan kids, Miles Allen, GWP Star, regenerative agriculture, Ansel Keys, the Urashami and Hillebo paper, epidemiology, and the Annals of Medicine paper.
B12 is the most obvious, the saturated fat argument. I think also the protein question, deaths of children from vegan diets. Professor Miles Allen, GWP Star, the regenerative agriculture movement. Keys was doing his research. There were other researchers, as you know, Hillebo and Urashami, the epidemiology industry, a paper that came out in 2019 by the Annals of Internal Medicine.
There is one area I tried to bypass. Jayne can get personal. For example, Gunhild Stordalen has an MD and PhD, and she gave a great TEDMED talk on eating less meat. Her list of achievements blows me away. From gathering dozens of esteemed scientists to form the EAT Lancet Commission, to her work with UNICEF, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, and many others, all while suffering a very painful autoimmune disease. Hero. I get to interview Gunhild on this channel 3.5 months from now, her health permitting, and I consider it a great honor. When Jayne referenced her, she wrote,
Stordalen's now ex-husband, Petter, doesn't appear to be a fan of the Commission's dietary recommendations. During a trip to Las Vegas, he posted a photo of himself eating a giant burger at the Heart Attack Grill.
Is it just me, or is that a little bit depraved? Yes, he posted a joke photo on Instagram for Gunhild, and the tabloids ran with it. But look what he posts seriously and recently on Instagram that the tabloids don't run with. Google Translate said of his comment, "The goal is clear. Every fourth of all burgers sold at Nordic Choice this summer must be plant-based." Nordic Choice is the big hotel chain he runs. Together with Naturli', Nordic Choice has tasted its way to a really good burger. Naturli' is a Danish plant-based food company. And did you know that one meat burger contributes as much CO2 emissions as 20 plant-based burgers? Horrified emoji. Have you had a plant-based burger before? Recommended to try. I don't think judging Dr. Stordalen's work based on a joke Instagram post is either good science or journalism. Okay, on to part 1, big religion.
I do want everyone to feel comfortable. That's why I'd like to talk to you about Jesus.
Honestly, this section seems a little bit depraved as well. The focus is on the Seventh-day Adventists, and it dives into the religious drama of the 1800s. In 1863, the Adventists encouraged their members to eat whole plants and dairy. Not a revolutionary concept when you consider a great number of Hindus and Buddhists had been lacto-vegetarians for more than 2,000 years. What made the Adventists unique is in the 50s, over the objection of a dean who feared this would embarrass them, they began to study the nutritional status of vegetarians versus non-vegetarians at one of their universities. And that led to this.
It's a health and science institute affiliated with Seventh-day Adventists that's been studying members of the faith since 1958.
And that led to huge long-term nutritional studies funded by the National Institutes of Health that produced hundreds of publications and won the respect of nutritional scientists around the world. And that led to Joan Sabate, an Adventist nutrition professor, being selected for the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Committee. Nina Teicholz's lobbying group tried hard to get Dr. Sabate removed from the Guidelines Committee on the basis of his religion. The problem is, by law, the USDA cannot discriminate on the basis of religion. And anyway, that would cast a very large net because Muslims, Jews, Mormons, Buddhists, Hindus, and Sikhs also have their own dietary preferences. So they have to select respected nutrition scientists, and Dr. Sabate is that. Jayne makes clear in her book that the Adventists have a huge network of hospitals and schools to promote their plant-dominant message, which is very threatening to the beef industry. For their part, the Adventists believe it would be irresponsible not to promote the most compelling science, because it is so very clear from the science that whole plant-dominant diets are best for human health. And they run a lot of hospitals filled with people who are there from eating poor diets. My conclusion is this chapter is not about debunking religion, it's another attack on advice to limit meat consumption. It's inconceivable to me that the Adventists influence nutritional guidelines all over the world, including countries like Qatar, who hardly know about Adventists. But it is conceivable that the science is so clear, every country's scientists converged on the very same thing. Part 2, Big Business.
And the prize is big indeed. The rapidly growing plant-based meat market alone is expected to be worth more than $30 billion by 2026.
I chased that reference and I couldn't find any estimates that optimistic, but I think the important thing is to put whatever estimates into context. The Boston Consulting Group posted this chart showing the base case is alternate proteins will only be 11% of the market by 2035, and the most optimistic case is 22%. And those estimates include lab-grown meat. Jayne knows this. I listened to a podcast Jayne was on where her host put dairy in perspective.
So we just have to get the message out across a wide range of media.
The dairy industry is worth $760 billion a year. The plant-based industry is $15 billion.
Here's why she believes Big Pharma is in on the con.
For the pharmaceutical industry, the opportunity arises from the continued scaremongering around LDL cholesterol, an integral tenet of plant-based advocacy, and the consequent acceptance of the idea that LDL must be lowered via pharmacological solutions.
Isn't it the exact opposite? Whole plant advocates claim that plants decrease LDL, and all the credible science I've ever seen backs that up. Several doctors reached out to me after the previous episodes and said cholesterol-denying books like this go through the healthcare industry like a wrecking ball. When they try to inform patients of the risk of high LDL, one of the most well-established risk factors in medicine, they refuse diet changes and medications. But when they're in the hospital after their first heart attack, they're not looking for Jayne or Nina Teicholz to save their lives. Jayne is very critical of philanthropists like Branson and Gates investing in lab-grown meat. I'm not sure why, since the central theme of the book is we need meat for health. But I understand why Branson and Gates do it. Just look at Boston Consulting's chart. Investing in plant-based meat has by far the biggest impact on CO2 saved of any investment they can make. The hope is that lab-grown meat will be at least that dramatic. The conclusion from this chapter, unfortunately, is that the numbers are on the side of animal foods by a factor of something like 50 to 1. Part 3, Global Elites. The villain of this chapter is the EAT Lancet Commission. EAT Lancet is a group of globally acclaimed scientists, like Johan Rockström, who you may have seen in the Netflix special about global boundaries with David Attenborough. Also Walter Willett, the most referenced scientist in the world by other scientists in nutrition and medicine. And importantly, Shakuntala Thilsted, who won the World Food Prize in 2021 for saving millions in poor countries from malnourishment by developing ways for them to harvest small fish that are so nourishing and yet have a light environmental footprint. They are among my greatest heroes, but facing the environmental facts and putting out a call to eat less meat is one of the most emotional things you can do. I have an advanced copy of Marion Nestle's upcoming book, Slow Cooked, so I can interview her about her decades in food science and food politics. She said when she worked on the Surgeon General's report, saying eat less meat called the industry to arms, so they had to say eat less saturated fat. I'm not aware of any climate scientist who disagrees with EAT Lancet, so Jayne quotes John Ioannidis, who is neither climate nor nutritional scientist.
Stanford professor John Ioannidis stated that the health claims in the EAT Lancet diet are science fiction. I can't call it anything else.
It must be very confusing to be a consumer and not know who people like John are. He rose to fame in 2005 with a paper with a powerful headline. Most publicized research findings are false. I took it to reinforce one of my core beliefs about science that I mentioned in my previous episode. Focus on the landmark studies that have stood the test of time whose findings have been replicated. But science deniers had a field day with this paper. When the COVID pandemic arrived, John did what made him famous. He made emphatic statements about how wrong the experts were. But this time he designed this study to prove his case, and I thought, okay, and I participated in this study. The thing is, it's one thing to criticize science, but it's quite another to actually do science. He famously rushed out his results and went on Fox News many times to make statements like this.
Most of the population has minimal risk. It's in the range of dying while you're driving from home to work and back.
And he was predicting 10,000 deaths if we didn't take the precautions experts around the world were suggesting. Now he's known as the man who helped delay our response, spread misinformation, and missed his estimates by a factor of 100. But that hasn't stopped him from making emphatic statements about areas where he has no expertise, like about the EAT Lancet Commission. Mark Hyman interviewed Jayne recently, and they riffed about the EAT Lancet diet.
And then if you read the fine print in the study, it says, except if, and it lists a whole bunch of people who just should not be doing this, including the elderly, the young, people who are sick,
pregnant women,
chronic illness, and so forth. Pregnant women. And so that you're talking about probably 75% of the population who it's not good for.
Mark has a way of sounding evidence-based while making statements that don't check out. So, a team of global experts spent 3 years devising a diet that's not fit for children, pregnant women, and the elderly, and they hid it in the fine print? Here's the line they're referring to from the report, and it's not in the fine print. Practical considerations make defining a global healthy diet challenging. These difficulties include different nutritional needs of people because of age, sex, disease status, and physical activity levels, and needs of vulnerable populations such as young children and pregnant women. Isn't that the responsible thing to say for any diet? I did an episode on how young children and premenopausal women may need supplemental iron no matter what they eat.
Joanna Blythman asserted that the diet was a processed food diet reinvented.
Maybe we should hear from EAT Lancet directly on what this terrifying diet really is.
The first step was to define a healthy reference diet using the best available evidence. Definitely whole grains, not refined grains, fruits and vegetables are not too different than what you've heard in other dietary recommendations. Probably the most controversial are the quite modest amounts of red meat here. By standards of North America and much of Europe, that may seem like quite a small amount, but this is actually about the amount that people were eating in the Mediterranean countries, the traditional Mediterranean diet, when those people were the healthiest people in the world. So this is not radical, despite what you might hear from our friends in the beef industry. What it means is about a big juicy hamburger once a week if you want it, or a big juicy steak once a month if you want it, which is sort of how people treated red meat in the traditional Mediterranean diet. It was something that was special.
Headlines did break over a legit concern about this diet. Can impoverished people afford it? The sad answer is no, they can't afford any diet. They can barely afford rice. This is a terrible problem, and it's one reason I'm so inspired by one of the EAT Lancet commissioners, Jayne Buxton, who won the World Food Prize for helping impoverished nations with malnourishment. What do you do if you're EAT Lancet and, like the World Health Organization and UNICEF, you can't just ignore impoverished nations like diet book authors do? The most inspiring story I've ever heard about this problem is what Save the Children did in rural Vietnam. Harvard did a case study of it. Jerry and Monique Sternin went there to find out how some poor families had children that thrived, while most didn't.
In every case where there was a well-nourished kid, despite poverty, somebody was going out to the rice paddies and collecting tiny shrimps and crabs, adding those to the child's diet, as well as the top of sweet potato greens.
At the end of that year, 1,000 children had been sustainably rehabilitated. Within 3 years, the program was designated a national nutrition model. By 2000, 10 years later, more than 2.3 million Vietnamese children had been rehabilitated.
Unfortunately, not all impoverished nations have tiny shrimps and sweet potato greens there for the taking like rural Vietnam had. So Shakuntala had to develop a different approach. EAT Lancet's mission is not to make money like the organizations and book authors that are attacking it and ignoring impoverished nations. EAT Lancet's mission is humanitarian. And promoting small fish in poor countries has a far smaller environmental footprint than beef and is far more nutritious. EAT Lancet knows many people in impoverished nations are dependent on livestock, and so they have livestock scientists on the commission. The term global elites this book uses feels like it's designed to create resentment and suspicion. But really, who among us is devoting their lives to easing malnourishment in impoverished nations? Do they really deserve the term global elites? My conclusion from this chapter is the EAT Lancet Commission is as close to the dream team as I can imagine, because Gunhild Stordalen has done what no one else has: gather the world's leading climate, food, and nutrition scientists to focus on one of the world's most important problems. Some people will continue to lose their minds over it because it asks us to reduce our meat consumption to 1 burger per week. But I don't know if you could find a legit climate scientist to take issue with that. So what are my conclusions about the whole book? It is that it has the fingerprints of the beef industry all over it. It's anti-chicken, anti-pork, anti-plants, anti-lab-grown beef, anti-Ansel Keys' fish and plant-dominant Mediterranean diet, and it's promoted by a camera-ready mom. They wrote a beautiful coffee table book celebrating 100 years of running that exact playbook. Except in Japan, they were marketing against several thousand years of Hindu tradition, not Adventists.
I'm so happy to be done with that episode. I actually hate debunking episodes.
Grandpa feels like a jerk when he does those episodes.
So I came to the California Academy of Sciences with the grandkids to regain my sanity. Cool. But I get these passionate emails saying, if you don't do it, who will? The guy who persuaded me to review this book is a very bright engineer at a tech giant here in Silicon Valley who needed to remain anonymous. He sold me by offering to help and made the episodes better. Also, Paul Behrens, a respected professor of climate science with 2 great books, fact-checked episode 2 and provided an important clarification. Thanks, everyone!